biological and cultural diversity are under threat, we urgently need to think of ways to conserve them. In 1992, at the Rio Earth Summit, countries negotiated an agreement to conserve biodiversity and promote its sustainable and equitable use, the Convention on Biological Diversity, also known as the CBD. The agreements that came from this meeting, as well as earlier and later agreements addressing conservation, economic development, and indigenous peoples' rights, helped create a new approach that sought to balance economic development, conservation, and often indigenous rights. One part of the convention, known as Access and Benefit Sharing, or ABS, was intended to provide both an incentive for governments to conserve biodiversity and enable its sustainable use, and a mechanism to fund the costs of conservation. New medicines, crops, and other products developed by industrialized countries could contribute to economic development and conservation in high biodiversity countries. However, it is now 30 years down the line, and there is little evidence of conservation. 1 million species are threatened with extinction, and ecosystems are under enormous pressure. This short video looks at the role biodiscovery and biotrade can play in supporting conservation. Let's take a step back and talk about the research and economic activities ABS was based upon. Biodiscovery, also known as bioprospecting, and biotrade. There are big differences between biotrade and biodiscovery, and we need to understand these differences in order to think about conservation benefits. The CBD was originally linked to biodiscovery, the collection and research of biological resources in order to discover genetic information or biochemicals of value, primarily in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sectors, but also including crop protection, food and beverage, and others. But biodiscovery rarely leads to blockbuster commercial products, and may also be far removed from species and ecosystems, and disconnected from conservation on the ground. Biotrade is the use of biodiversity, usually for the cosmetic, food, botanical medicine, and other sectors relying on raw materials. Let's run through some differences between biotrade and biodiscovery. Biotrade uses raw materials. Biodiscovery seeks access to small physical samples or genetic sequence data referred to as digital sequence information. Biotrade often uses traditional knowledge in products and marketing. Biodiscovery rarely does. Biotrade companies tend to be much smaller, earning less in revenue than those in biodiscovery. Biodiscovery companies are more research intensive and high-tech, and use more genetic sequence data and less physical material. So, what does this mean for conservation and sustainable use? Biotrade's relationship to conservation grows from company partnerships around the harvesting and sourcing of raw materials. Biodiscovery's relationship to conservation grows from building biodiversity research capacity and knowledge, and sometimes monetary benefits for protected areas and conservation projects. But over the years, biotrade and biodiscovery have rarely led to significant conservation gains, and ABS policy has focused less on conservation and sustainable use and more on equity and economic development. Companies continue to develop new ingredients and products from biodiversity in partnership with communities. In some cases, collaborations have helped build research capacity in high biodiversity countries, but this has not been enough. ABS can provide communities and governments with greater control over the use of biodiversity and enable more equitable benefit sharing. Some governments have set up ABS and conservation funds, and a global fund is under discussion. We have learned that all approaches to conservation work best when they are located within historical, cultural, and political realities, and honour connections between people and place. ABS is not a silver bullet, but it can be part of a patchwork of conservation strategies.